The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Nora Grant's trembling hands as she clutched her prayer book, the only possession that had survived the attack that claimed her family and their wagon train 3 days prior. The year was 1867, and the unforgiving Arizona Territory had already taken everything from her except her faith and the will to survive. Nora had been gathering firewood when the bandits struck their small caravan just outside of Redemption Creek. By the time she returned, smoke billowed into the sky, and the sounds of gunfire had faded to an eerie silence. She found her parents and younger brother among the dead, their wagon ransacked, their future in California erased in minutes. The only thing the bandits had overlooked was her mother's prayer book, which had fallen beneath the wagon seat. For 3 days, she'd been walking west, guided only by the sun and the desperate hope of finding civilization. Her cotton dress was torn and dusty, her boots worn thin, and her dark hair hung in matted waves around her pale face. At 22, Nora had never imagined facing the frontier alone, but with each step, she whispered prayers from the weathered book, clinging to words that promised comfort in the darkest valleys. As the final rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant mountains, Nora spotted a flicker of light in the valley below. Her parched lips formed a silent prayer of thanks as she stumbled down the rocky slope toward what appeared to be a small ranch nestled against the backdrop of a winding creek. Her legs finally gave way just yards from the property's fence line. As consciousness slipped away, she clutched the prayer book to her chest, her last thoughts a mixture of hope and fear as heavy boot steps approached through the darkness. When Nora awoke, she found herself lying on a simple but comfortable bed in a sparsely furnished cabin. Sunlight streamed through a small window, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. Panic seized her until her fingers found the familiar leather cover of her prayer book on the bedside table. "You're awake." The deep voice came from the doorway, where a tall man with broad shoulders leaned against the frame. His face was tanned from the sun, and his sandy blonde hair was in need of a trim, but his eyes, a startling blue, held a kindness that immediately put her at ease. "Found you half dead at my fence line last night. You've been asleep almost 15 hours. "Thank you for your kindness, sir," Nora managed, her voice raspy from thirst. "I'm Nora Grant." "Adam Eckhart," he replied, approaching with a cup of water. "Drink slow." As she sipped the cool water, Adam pulled a chair beside the bed. "You want to tell me what a woman like you is doing walking alone through Apache territory?" Nora's hands trembled as she recounted the attack. Adam listened silently, his jaw tightening at her mention of the bandits' cruelty. When her voice broke describing finding her family, he surprised her by gently placing his calloused hand over hers. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Grant. No one should face such tragedy." "The prayer book was my mother's," she whispered, touching its worn cover. "It's all I have left of her now." Adam nodded, understanding reflecting in his eyes. "Rest today. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next for you. Redemption Creek is another 2 days' ride west, but I've got business there in a week. I can take you then if you'd like." "I have no money, Mr. Eckhart." "I can't pay you for wasn't asking for payment," he interrupted, standing. "Just offering help. That's what neighbors do out here." Over the next few days, Nora regained her strength. Adam's ranch was modest but well kept, with a small herd of cattle, 2 working horses, and a vegetable garden that had seen better days. She learned he'd been alone on the property for 3 years, since his father's passing. On her 4th day at the ranch, Nora insisted on earning her keep. Adam found her in the kitchen at dawn, cooking breakfast from the meager supplies in his pantry. "You don't need to do that," he said, though the appreciation in his eyes betrayed his words. "I need to be useful," she replied simply. I can cook, clean, and I noticed your garden needs attention. I was raised on a farm in Missouri before my family decided to head west. I know my way around growing things." Adam studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Could use the help, I suppose, but this is temporary, understand. I'll still take you to town when you're ready." But as days turned into weeks, neither mentioned her departure again. They fell into a comfortable routine, Adam tending the cattle and maintaining the property, Nora bringing life back to the garden and transforming the sparse cabin into something that felt more like a home. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. It was during these quiet moments that Nora would read from her prayer book, finding strength in the familiar words. She noticed how Adam would listen, his face thoughtful, though he never commented. One evening, after a particularly hard day when one of the calves died despite their best efforts to save it, Nora found Adam sitting alone in the darkness of the porch, a bottle of whiskey beside him. "My father was a man of faith," he said without preamble as she sat beside him. "Read from that same book every night, had me memorizing passages before I could properly saddle a horse." "You don't read it anymore?" she asked gently. Adam took a swig from the bottle. "Lost my taste for it after the war. Saw too many men praying right before they died horrible deaths. Made me wonder what the point was." "The point isn't that prayer prevents suffering," Nora said softly. "It's that it gives us strength to endure it." Adam looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You lost everything, yet you still believe." "I have to," she whispered. "Without faith, I'd have nothing left." The next morning, Adam was gone before sunrise, leaving only a note saying he had business in a neighboring property and would return by nightfall. Nora spent the day tending to the garden and preparing a stew with vegetables she'd harvested, and some of the dried beef Adam had stored. When he returned, his wagon was loaded with lumber. Without explanation, he began unloading it near a clearing about 50 yards from the main house, beneath a large cottonwood tree. "What are you building?" Nora finally asked on the third day of watching him work. "You'll see," was all he said, wiping sweat from his brow before returning to his labor. It took 2 weeks of dawn to dusk work, but finally, Adam led Nora to the small structure he'd built. It was simple but beautiful, a tiny chapel, just large enough for 2 people to sit comfortably. He'd crafted a small bench and a kneeler, and the afternoon light filtered through a window he'd set with colored glass pieces he'd traded for in town, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden floor. "I thought you might want a proper place to pray," he said, suddenly seeming uncomfortable with her stunned silence. "Not much, but it's private, peaceful." Tears filled Nora's eyes as she walked into the small space, touching the smooth wood he'd carefully sanded and finished. "It's beautiful, Adam. But why?" Adam shifted his weight, looking at the ground before meeting her gaze. "Because it matters to you, and somewhere along the way you started mattering to me." Nora's heart fluttered at his words, but before she could respond, he added quickly, "There's something else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn Bible. "Was my father's. Haven't opened it since he died. Thought maybe." He hesitated, then continued more softly, "Thought maybe you could read it to me sometimes. Help me remember why he believed so strongly." "I'd be honored," she whispered. Adam cleared his throat, clearly emotional but trying to hide it. "Well, I'll leave you to it then." He turned to go, but Nora caught his arm. "Adam," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her heart. "Pray beside me." The vulnerability that flashed across his face nearly broke her heart. Wordlessly, he nodded and followed her inside the tiny chapel. Together they sat, and Nora opened her mother's prayer book to a psalm of thanksgiving. As she read, Adam's rough hand found hers, and in that moment, something beautiful and tender took root between them. Summer arrived, bringing with it scorching days and brief, violent thunderstorms that did little to relieve the heat, but provided precious water for the expanding garden. Nora had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months, and though Adam had mentioned taking her to town several times, neither seemed eager to follow through with those plans. One sweltering afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing a section of fence damaged in a recent storm, Adam wiped the sweat from his brow and studied Nora with an intensity that made her flush beyond what the heat warranted. "You know, most women wouldn't be out here in this heat driving fence posts," he observed, a hint of admiration in his voice. Nora hammered the nail with perhaps more force than necessary. "Most women haven't had to learn to survive the way I have." Adam nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "Makes me wonder why you're still here, Nora. You're strong enough to make your own way now, smart enough too, yet you haven't asked me about going to town in weeks." The directness of his question caught her off guard. She set down her hammer and met his gaze. "Do you want me to leave, Adam?" "That's not what I asked." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken feelings. Nora had been fighting her growing attachment to this quiet, complicated man who built her a chapel because her faith mattered to him, who listened when she read from her prayer book in the evenings, who sometimes shared stories of his own childhood when the night was dark and the stars were bright overhead. "I stay because I have nowhere else I'd rather be," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of thunder. "I stay because here with you, I've found something I never expected to find again after losing my family. I've found peace." Adam set down his tools and took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. His calloused hand gently touched her cheek, and Nora felt her breath catch. "I don't want you to go," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Haven't wanted that since the day you woke up in my cabin, but I need to know you're staying because you want to, not because you feel you have no choice." "I'm staying because of you, Adam," she whispered. "Only you." The first drops of rain began to fall as his lips found hers in a tender kiss that quickly deepened with months of restrained longing. By the time they broke apart, they were both breathless and soaked to the skin from the sudden downpour. Adam laughed, a rare, joyful sound that made Nora's heart soar. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's get out of this storm." They ran toward the house, but as they passed the little chapel, Nora tugged him toward it instead. Inside, they were sheltered from the rain, though droplets leaked through in places where the roof wasn't quite perfect. "I've never been more grateful," Nora said, reaching for her prayer book that she kept on the small shelf Adam had built. "For this second chance. For you." Adam pulled her into his arms, pressing his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it, Nora Grant." That evening, as they sat by the fire drying their clothes, Adam spoke of his time in the war, something he'd never done before. He told her about the horrors he'd witnessed, the friends he'd lost, and how he'd returned home a different man than the boy who'd left with grand ideas of glory and honor. "My father tried to help me find my way back to some kind of peace," he said, staring into the flames. "But he died before I could find my way through the darkness. This ranch was his dream, not mine. Been keeping it going out of obligation more than anything else." "And now," Nora asked softly. Adam looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Now I'm starting to see a future here. With you, if you'll have me." "Are you asking me something, Adam Eckhart?" A slow smile spread across his face. "Not yet, but soon. There are things I need to do first to make sure I can offer you the life you deserve." True to his word, Adam rode to Redemption Creek the following week. He returned with supplies, seeds for the garden, and a letter he'd posted to a lawyer in Tucson about properly documenting his claim to the land, something his father had begun but never completed before his death. "Want to make sure everything's legal and proper," he explained to Nora. No surprises down the road. What he didn't tell her was that he'd also purchased a simple gold band from the town's only jewelry merchant, a former prospector who'd found more reliable income crafting pieces for the town's wealthier residents. The ring was hidden in his saddlebag, waiting for the right moment. That moment came sooner than he'd planned. Just 2 days after his return, as they walked together toward the chapel for their evening prayer time, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the peaceful twilight. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the property, and Adam immediately pushed Nora behind him, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Stay back," he murmured, stepping forward to meet the strangers. The men rode closer, and Adam's posture tensed as they came into view. Nora watched his face transform from wariness to cold recognition, and suddenly she understood these were not random travelers. "Well, well," called the leader, a rough-looking man with a scar running down his cheek. "If it ain't Adam Eckhart, still squatting on this worthless piece of land, I see." "Blackwell," Adam acknowledged, his voice flat. "Thought you and your boys would have found your way to a hangman's noose by now." The man named Blackwell laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down Nora's spine. "Now is that any way to greet old friends? Especially when we've come with such interesting news." "We're not friends," Adam replied coldly. "State your business and move on." Blackwell dismounted, followed by his companions. All 3 men wore guns low on their hips, and their eyes held a dangerous gleam that made Nora step closer to Adam. "Word is the territorial court finally sorted through some old land claims," Blackwell said, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Including your father's unfinished business. Seems this property wasn't his to claim after all. Previous owner had legal heirs." He waved the paper. "Heirs who sold their rights to me, legal and proper." Adam's face remained impassive, but Nora could see the tension in his shoulders. "My father settled this land fair, built everything here with his own hands." "Maybe so," Blackwell agreed with mock sympathy, "but he didn't file the proper paperwork before he died. Been meaning to tell you for months now, but you know how busy a man gets." His eyes shifted to Nora, and his smile turned ugly. "Though I see you've been busy yourself." "Didn't know you had a woman, Eckhart." Adam shifted to block Blackwell's view of Nora. "The lady is none of your concern, and I don't believe a word about this supposed claim. Show me the court's documentation, not some paper you likely forged." Blackwell's expression hardened. "Got all the papers back in town. You're welcome to come see them tomorrow. In the meantime, consider this your notice. You've got 1 week to clear out, or we'll clear you out ourselves." As the men mounted their horses to leave, Blackwell called over his shoulder, "Nice little chapel you built there. Didn't take you for the religious type, Eckhart. Seems people do change." After they'd ridden away, Adam turned to Nora, his face grim. "I need to ride to Tucson first thing tomorrow. That's where the territorial records are kept. I need to see if what Blackwell says is true." "Who were those men?" Nora asked, still shaken by the encounter. Adam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Jeb Blackwell and I served together in the war. He was discharged for theft and violence against civilians. Been causing trouble in these parts for years, mostly cattle rustling and land swindles." His eyes met hers. "I'm sorry you had to see that, Nora, and I'm sorry that the future I promised you might be in jeopardy." Nora took his hand firmly in hers. "My father always said that trouble comes to test our mettle. We'll face this together, Adam." That night, they prayed longer than usual in the little chapel, Nora's voice steady as she read words of courage and faith from her prayer book. Afterward, as they walked back to the house hand in hand, Adam suddenly stopped. "This isn't how I planned it," he said, turning to face her. "Wanted everything to be perfect, secure. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that tomorrow isn't guaranteed." Before Nora could ask what he meant, Adam was down on one knee, pulling the gold ring from his pocket. "Nora Grant, I love you. Whatever happens with this land, whatever challenges come our way, I want to face them with you as my wife. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Nora's eyes as she nodded, too overcome for words. As Adam slipped the ring onto her finger, she finally found her voice. "Yes, Adam. Yes." Their joy was tempered by uncertainty, but that night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Adam made a promise. "Whatever happens, Nora, we'll build a life together. Even if it's not here, we'll find a place to call our own." The next morning dawned clear and hot, the Arizona summer showing no mercy as Adam prepared for the journey to Tucson. It would take him at least 3 days to reach the territorial capital and return, and leaving Nora alone made him uneasy after Blackwell's visit. "Perhaps I should come with you," Nora suggested as she helped him pack provisions. "Too dangerous," Adam replied. "The road to Tucson crosses Apache territory, and there have been raids recently. Besides," he added, checking his pistol before holstering it, "someone needs to keep an eye on the place. Blackwell's not above stealing whatever isn't nailed down if he thinks the property is undefended." Nora knew he was right, but the thought of being alone with Blackwell possibly returning made her stomach twist with anxiety. Still, she put on a brave face. "I can handle a rifle. My father made sure of that." Adam smiled at her determination. "I know you can. There's a loaded shotgun by the door, and my spare pistol in the drawer beside the bed." His expression turned serious. "If Blackwell or his men show up while I'm gone, don't try to be brave, Nora. Fire a warning shot and hide. The Marston's ranch is 5 miles east. They'll come running if they hear gunfire." After a lingering embrace and a promise to return as quickly as possible, Adam mounted his horse and rode away. Nora watched until he disappeared over the horizon, then turned to face the empty ranch, determination straightening her spine. She would not cower in fear during Adam's absence. The first day passed uneventfully. Nora kept busy with chores, tending the garden in the early morning hours before the heat became unbearable, then moving inside to work on mending Adam's shirts and preserving some of the vegetables they'd harvested. As evening approached, she visited the chapel to read from her prayer book, finding comfort in the familiar words and the sacred space Adam had created for her. On the second day, as Nora was hanging laundry to dry in the hot Arizona sun, she spotted a dust cloud in the distance. Heart racing, she hurried inside for the shotgun, then positioned herself on the porch, weapon ready but out of immediate sight. Relief washed over her when she recognized Sheriff Miller from Redemption Creek, accompanied by a young deputy. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for fairness, tipped his hat as he dismounted. "Miss Grant," he greeted her. "Sorry to arrive unannounced. Eckhart around?" "He's gone to Tucson," Nora replied, still holding the shotgun loosely at her side. "On business." "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" Miller grimaced. "Could say that. Wanted to warn him about Blackwell. The man's been drinking heavily in town, making threats. Says he's got legal claim to this property now." "He was here 2 days ago," Nora confirmed. "That's why Adam went to Tucson to check the territorial records." The sheriff nodded. "Smart move. Blackwell's been known to forge documents when it suits him." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Grant, I don't like the idea of you being out here alone with Blackwell stirring up trouble. Why don't you come back to town with us? You can stay with Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house until Eckhart returns." Nora was touched by the sheriff's concern but shook her head firmly. "Thank you, Sheriff, but this is my home now. Adam and I are engaged to be married, and I won't abandon our property." Miller studied her for a moment, then nodded with grudging respect. "Suit yourself, but be careful. Blackwell's not a man to underestimate." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a box of shotgun shells. "Extra ammunition, just in case." After the sheriff and his deputy departed, Nora tried to return to her chores, but an uneasy feeling had settled over her. That night, she slept fitfully, the shotgun propped beside the bed and Adam's pistol under her pillow. The third day dawned with an oppressive heat that seemed to press down on the land like a physical weight. By midday, dark clouds were building on the horizon, promising one of the violent summer thunderstorms common to the territory. Nora hurried to bring in the dry laundry and secure anything that might blow away in the coming winds. As she was checking that the animals were safely in their pens, a sound made her freeze horses approaching, more than one. With her heart in her throat, Nora rushed back to the house, grabbing the shotgun on her way to the window. Blackwell and 5 men were riding toward the ranch, their expressions visible even at a distance: hard, determined, dangerous. Nora's mind raced. The Marston Ranch was too far to run to before the men reached her. Her only option was to defend the property and pray that Adam would return soon. Loading the shotgun with steady hands, Nora positioned herself by the front window, partially concealed by the curtain. As the riders approached the house, she called out in a voice that betrayed none of her fear. "That's far enough, Mr. Blackwell. Sheriff Miller knows you're causing trouble. I suggest you turn around and leave." Blackwell reined in his horse, laughing as he spotted the shotgun barrel protruding from the window. "Well now, little lady, that's not very hospitable. We just came to discuss business with Eckhart." "Mr. Eckhart isn't here," Nora replied firmly, "and you have no business on this property." "See, that's where you're wrong," Blackwell said, his voice hardening as he dismounted. "This is my property now. Got the papers right here." He patted his vest pocket. "And since Eckhart's not around to discuss terms, we thought we'd just help ourselves to what's ours." One of the men began moving toward the barn, where Adam kept his best horses and tack. Without hesitation, Nora fired the shotgun into the air, the blast echoing across the property. "Next shot won't be a warning," she called, quickly reloading. "This property belongs to Adam Eckhart, and nothing leaves here without his permission." Blackwell's face darkened with anger. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that, but you're outnumbered and Eckhart ain't coming to save you." He gestured to his men. "Search the place. Take anything valuable." As the men spread out, Nora felt panic rising in her throat. She couldn't watch all of them at once. When 2 approached the front door, she fired again, the shot splintering the wood of the porch just inches from their boots. "Next one's center mass," she warned, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The distant rumble of thunder punctuated her words, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Blackwell looked up at the darkening sky, then back at Nora with a cold smile. "Storm's coming, little lady. Might want to think about being reasonable before things get really unpleasant." A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The sudden downpour seemed to come from nowhere, sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere yards. Nora used the distraction to move away from the window, retreating further into the house as she heard the men shouting to each other through the deluge. The front door burst open, wood splintering as Blackwell and 2 of his men forced their way in. Nora fired the shotgun again, grazing one man's arm and sending him staggering backward with a howl of pain. "You'll pay for that," Blackwell snarled, drawing his pistol as Nora desperately tried to reload. Before he could fire, The sound of galloping hooves cut through the storm's fury. A shot rang out, and Blackwell's pistol flew from his hand, clattering to the floor as he cursed in pain and surprise. Adam stood in the doorway, rain-soaked and furious, his pistol trained steadily on Blackwell. Behind him, more riders appeared through the curtain of rain. Sheriff Miller and several deputies. "Touch her, and it's the last thing you do," Adam growled, his voice deadly calm as he stepped inside, never taking his eyes or his aim off Blackwell. The sheriff and his men quickly disarmed and restrained Blackwell's companions while Adam kept his former comrade at gunpoint. Nora sagged with relief, the shotgun suddenly heavy in her trembling hands. "You all right?" Adam asked, his eyes briefly meeting hers, filled with concern. "I'm fine," she assured him, straightening her shoulders. "Just glad you're back." Sheriff Miller approached Blackwell, producing a pair of handcuffs. "Jebediah Blackwell, you're under arrest for attempted theft, trespassing, and assault. Got a nice cell waiting for you in Tucson." "This is my land," Blackwell protested, wincing as the sheriff secured the cuffs around his wrists. "I got the papers to prove it." "Funny thing about those papers," the sheriff replied. The territorial judge was mighty interested to hear about them, seeing as he never signed any such document. "Forgery's a serious offense, Blackwell. That's on top of the outstanding warrants from Nevada and Texas." As the sheriff led Blackwell out into the rain, Adam finally holstered his weapon and crossed to Nora, gathering her into his arms. "I came back as fast as I could." Met the sheriff on the road. He was already headed this way with news about Blackwell. "Did you find out about the land claim?" Nora asked, her voice muffled against his wet shirt. Adam pulled back slightly, a smile breaking through his grim expression. "It's ours, Nora, all legal and proper." My father had filed the initial claim correctly. Blackwell's documents were complete forgeries. The judge in Tucson gave me the final deed right there on the spot. Relief and joy washed over Nora, and she laughed through sudden tears. "I was so afraid we'd lose everything." "Not everything," Adam said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "Even if we'd lost the land, we'd still have each other. That's what matters most." Sheriff Miller returned, water dripping from his hat brim. "Got those varmints secured. We'll take them to Tucson tomorrow when the storm passes." He looked around at the damaged door and broken window. "Place got a bit shot up, I see." "Nothing we can't fix," Adam replied, his arm tight around Nora's waist. The sheriff nodded, clearly impressed. "Miss Grant held her own against 6 armed men. That's quite a woman you've got there, Eckhart." "Don't I know it?" Adam agreed, looking at Nora with unmistakable pride and love. After the sheriff and his deputies had taken Blackwell and his men to the barn to wait out the worst of the storm, Adam and Nora stood on the porch, watching the rain wash away the dust and violence of the day. "I was thinking," Adam said, his arm around Nora's shoulders, "maybe we shouldn't wait too long for that wedding. Life's too uncertain out here." Nora leaned into his embrace, her prayer book clutched in her free hand. "I was thinking the same thing." "Perhaps when Reverend Collins makes his monthly visit to Redemption Creek next week." Adam smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Next week sounds perfect." "And after that?" He gestured toward the horizon, where the setting sun was beginning to break through the dissipating storm clouds, painting the sky in brilliant golds and purples. "After that, we have the rest of our lives to build something beautiful together." "Something beautiful," Nora echoed, her heart full as she looked from the sunset to the little chapel Adam had built for her. "It's already begun." The following week passed in a flurry of preparation. Despite the damage to the house from Blackwell's intrusion, Adam and Nora focused on readying the ranch for their wedding. News of their engagement spread quickly, and to Nora's surprise, Neighbors she'd never met began arriving with gifts and offers of help. Sarah Marston, wife of the rancher 5 miles east, brought a beautiful white dress she'd made for her own daughter's wedding. Jenny eloped to California with that miner instead, she explained with a wry smile. Their loss is your gain. It should fit you with just a few alterations. Other neighboring women helped Nora prepare food for the celebration, while the men assisted Adam in repairing the damaged house and building extra seating for the ceremony, which they decided to hold beside the small chapel. On the evening before the wedding, Adam found Nora in the chapel, reading from her prayer book by lantern light. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her head bowed, lips moving slightly as she read, the golden light playing across her features. The sight stirred something profound in him, a feeling of rightness and peace he'd never expected to find again after the war. Having second thoughts, he asked softly, stepping inside. Nora looked up with a smile that banished any real concern behind his teasing question. Not a single one. Just thanking God for bringing me to you, even through such difficult circumstances. Adam sat beside her on the bench, their shoulders touching. I never told you this, but the night I found you at my fence line, I almost didn't check what was out there. Thought it might be a coyote or some other animal. Something made me look anyway. Providence, Nora said simply. Maybe so. Adam took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band he'd placed there. I wasn't looking for love, Nora. Wasn't looking for anything but to be left alone with my memories and regrets. But then you arrived, with nothing but that prayer book and your unshakable faith, and somehow you showed me there could be more to life than just surviving day to day. Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. We saved each other, I think. They sat in comfortable silence until the lantern began to flicker, oil running low. As they walked back to the house under a canopy of stars, Adam stopped suddenly and pointed to the eastern sky. Shooting star, he said as a streak of light arced across the darkness. Make a wish, Nora shook her head, smiling up at him. I already have everything I could wish for. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the early October air crisp with the promise of autumn after the relentless summer heat. By mid-morning, wagons and riders had begun arriving at the ranch, bringing nearly everyone from Redemption Creek and the surrounding homesteads, far more people than Nora and Adam had anticipated. Word gets around fast in these parts, Sheriff Miller explained with a chuckle when he arrived. Not much entertainment out here. A wedding's better than any traveling show. As noon approached, Nora stood in the bedroom of what was now truly her home, Sarah Marston helping her with the final touches of her appearance. The white dress fit perfectly after Sarah's skilled alterations, and Nora's dark hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with wildflowers the neighboring children had gathered that morning. You look beautiful, dear, Sarah said, stepping back to admire her work. Adam won't know what hit him. A knock at the door revealed Sheriff Miller, looking uncomfortable in his cleaned and pressed uniform. Ladies, the Reverend's ready whenever you are, he cleared his throat. And Miss Grant, Nora, I'd be honored if you'd allow me to walk you down the aisle, so to speak. Since your father can't be here. Tears pricked Nora's eyes at the unexpected offer. I'd like that very much, Sheriff. Thank you. Outside, the guests had gathered in chairs and benches arranged in a semicircle facing the small chapel. Adam stood waiting, wearing a new shirt and his cleanest trousers, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. His hands fidgeted slightly at his sides until his eyes found Nora approaching on the sheriff's arm. The crowd faded away as Adam watched his bride walk toward him, her face radiant with happiness. In that moment, all the hardship and loss that had brought them together seemed part of a greater design. Each painful step, leading inexorably to this perfect union. Reverend Collins, a circuit preacher who served the small communities throughout the territory, conducted a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When it came time to exchange vows, Adam surprised Nora by reciting words he'd clearly memorized, not the standard marriage promises, but a passage from her prayer book about love enduring through all hardship and remaining steadfast through every storm. Nora, too moved to speak for a moment, finally found her voice to make her own vows, promising to stand beside Adam through whatever life might bring, to help him carry his burdens and share his joys, to build a home and a future grounded in faith and love. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Collins proclaimed with evident pleasure, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music provided by several neighbors who had brought instruments, dancing on a cleared space near the house, and more food than Adam's ranch had ever seen. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the land, Adam pulled Nora away from the festivities toward their chapel. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her inside. In the fading light, Nora saw that Adam had added something to the small space, a beautifully crafted shelf on the wall with two niches. In one sat her mother's prayer book, in the other his father's Bible. "Thought they belonged together," Adam explained. "Like us." Nora touched the books gently, then turned to her husband with tears glistening in her eyes. "It's perfect, Adam. Everything is perfect." As twilight deepened into night outside their little sanctuary, Adam drew Nora into his arms. "I promise you, Nora Eckhart," he whispered against her hair, "that no matter what challenges come our way, I will always be by your side. And every evening for the rest of our lives, we'll pray beside each other in this chapel I built for you." "For us," Nora corrected softly. "You built it for us." The years that followed brought both joy and hardship to the Eckharts, as life on the frontier demanded resilience and determination. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, Adam's knowledge of cattle and horsemanship, complemented by Nora's skill with growing things and managing the household economy. Their first winter as a married couple tested them with unusually heavy snowfall that isolated the ranch for nearly a month. They spent the long evenings planning improvements for the property, Adam sketching additions to the house, while Nora dreamed aloud of expanding the garden and perhaps adding chickens and goats to their livestock. Spring brought renewal to the land and news that expanded their joy. Nora was expecting their first child. The pregnancy progressed without complications, and as summer arrived once more, Nora's condition became increasingly evident. "You're glowing," Adam told her one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, his hand resting gently on her rounded belly. "I never knew a woman could look more beautiful, but you prove me wrong every day." Nora laughed, covering his hand with her own. "I feel like a stray cow that's wandered into the garden and eaten everything in sight. But thank you for the pretty lie, husband." "No lie," Adam insisted, leaning over to kiss her. "Just truth as I see it." Their son, William James Eckhart, arrived in late August, a healthy, robust baby with his father's blue eyes and a powerful set of lungs that announced his displeasure whenever he was hungry or uncomfortable. The birth was difficult but uncomplicated, with Sarah Marston serving as midwife while Adam paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. When Sarah finally invited him in to meet his son, Adam approached the bed almost reverently, his usual confidence replaced by wonder and a touch of fear as he gazed at the tiny bundle in Nora's arms. "He's perfect," Adam whispered, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. "Would you like to hold him?" Nora asked, smiling despite her exhaustion. Adam hesitated, then nodded, accepting the swaddled infant with trembling hands. As he cradled his son, a tear slipped down his weathered cheek. "My father always said there was no greater blessing than family. I didn't understand until now." That night, after Nora and the baby had fallen asleep, Adam slipped out to the chapel. Kneeling in the darkness, he offered prayers of gratitude not from the prayer book or Bible, but from his own heart, the words clumsy but sincere as he thanked God for his wife, his son, and the second chance at life and love he'd been given. The years passed with the rhythm of seasons on the ranch. William, called Will by his parents, grew into a sturdy, curious child with his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's thoughtful nature. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Catherine Rose, named for both Adam's and Nora's mothers. By 1875, the Eckhart ranch had expanded considerably. With careful management and strategic purchases of adjacent land when it became available, they now ran one of the more successful cattle operations in the area. The original cabin had been enlarged into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a formal parlor that Nora insisted they needed for civilization's sake. Through all the changes and growth, the little chapel remained untouched, a sacred space where the family gathered each evening for prayers. As the children grew old enough to understand, Nora taught them to read from both her prayer book and Adam's Bible, explaining the significance of each to their family's story. "Your father built this chapel for me when I had nothing but my faith and this book," she would tell them, touching the worn leather cover of her prayer book. "It was his way of saying he respected what mattered to me, even before he fully understood it himself." Will, practical even as a child, once asked, "But why didn't he just let you pray in the house, Mama?" It was Adam who answered, pulling his son onto his knee. "Because sometimes, son, when you love someone, you don't just make room for what's important to them, you build something special around it. You honor it. That's what love does." In the spring of 1876, as the Eckharts prepared to celebrate their 7th wedding anniversary, news reached them of increasing tension between settlers and the Apache in the northern part of the territory. Several isolated homesteads had been attacked, though whether by Apache warriors or opportunistic outlaws using the unrest as cover remained unclear. "Sheriff wants all the ranchers to be on alert," Adam told Nora after returning from a supply run to Redemption Creek. "Says there have been sightings of war parties moving south." Nora glanced out the window where 9-year-old Will was teaching 5-year-old Catherine to ride her new pony in the fenced corral. "Should we be worried?" Adam followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "Cautious, not worried. We've always had good relations with the local tribes, trading occasionally, respecting boundaries, but tensions have a way of spreading." As a precaution, Adam hired 2 additional ranch hands and established a rotation for night watches. He also began teaching Will basic marksmanship, despite Nora's initial reluctance. "He's too young," she protested. "He's growing up in the Arizona territory," Adam countered gently. "Better he learns properly from me than picks it up on his own. Besides, I started younger than he is now." June arrived with oppressive heat, and dire news Apache raiders had struck a ranch just 20 miles north, killing the owner and his oldest son before being driven off by neighbors who responded to the gunfire. The incident put the entire area on edge, with families sleeping with weapons close at hand and children kept close to home. On a sweltering afternoon in early July, as Nora was teaching Catherine her letters at the kitchen table, Will burst through the door, breathless with excitement. "Riders coming, Mama, lots of them." Nora rose quickly, moving to the window. In the distance, she could see a cloud of dust approaching from the east, too many riders to be neighbors or normal travelers. Her heart raced as she grabbed her daughter's hand. "Will, go to the bunkhouse. Tell your father and the men. Now." As Will ran to alert Adam, who was checking on a sick calf with the ranch hands, Nora hurried Catherine to the bedroom. She retrieved the shotgun from the cabinet, checked that it was loaded, then knelt before her frightened daughter. "Catherine, listen carefully. You're going to hide under the bed and stay very quiet no matter what you hear. Don't come out until either Mama or Papa comes for you. Understand?" The little girl nodded, blue eyes wide with fear but trusting. "Is it bad men, Mama? Like the ones Papa talks about sometimes?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Nora answered honestly, "but Papa will protect us. Now under the bed, quick as a bunny." Once Catherine was hidden, Nora returned to the window, shotgun at the ready. Relief flooded through her as she recognized the approaching riders, not Apache warriors or bandits, but a cavalry patrol led by a young lieutenant she'd met in town the previous winter. By the time the soldiers reached the ranch yard, Adam and the ranch hands had emerged from the bunkhouse, rifles in hand but lowered when they too recognized the patrol. "Lieutenant Davis," Adam greeted the officer as he dismounted. "Wasn't expecting the army this far south." Lieutenant Davis removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mr. Eckhart, Mrs. Eckhart, sorry to arrive unannounced. We're evacuating all civilians from this area. Orders from Fort Bowie." "Evacuating," Nora repeated, having retrieved Catherine from her hiding place. "Why?" "Major uprising to the north," Davis explained grimly. 3 settlements burned in the past week. Command doesn't have enough men to protect isolated ranches. Everyone's being moved to Redemption Creek or Tucson until the situation's resolved. Adam's expression hardened. "This is our home, Lieutenant. We've put 9 years of blood and sweat into this land. I'm not abandoning it to raiders. With all due respect, sir, this isn't a request." The lieutenant's voice remained polite but firm. "I have orders to escort all civilians to safety. You and your men can help defend Redemption Creek if you wish to fight." Nora saw the conflict in Adam's face, the desire to protect what they'd built warring with his responsibility to keep his family safe. She stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "Adam," she said softly, "we can rebuild buildings, replace cattle. We can't replace Will and Catherine." The fight seemed to drain from Adam's shoulders. He nodded once sharply. "How long do we have to pack?" "1 hour," Lieutenant Davis replied. "Only essentials. We can send a wagon back for your valuables once the area's secured." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Nora packed clothing, food, and medical supplies, while Adam secured the livestock as best he could, leaving enough water and feed for several days in hopes they'd return quickly. As Nora gathered the last of their necessities, she paused in the doorway of their chapel. The evening sun streamed through the colored glass window, illuminating the shelf where her prayer book and Adam's Bible rested side by side. Without hesitation, she collected both, wrapping them carefully in a clean cloth before placing them in her bag. When it was time to leave, the family mounted the wagon Adam had prepared, with Will riding his pony alongside and Catherine perched on the seat between her parents. As the cavalry patrol formed up around them, Nora looked back at the ranch, their home, their livelihood, the future they'd built together. "We'll come back," Adam promised, his voice rough with emotion as he followed her gaze. "Whatever happens, we'll rebuild." Nora reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I know, home is wherever we're together. But Adam," she hesitated, then continued, "the chapel, I can't bear the thought of it being destroyed." Adam brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "That chapel stood through storm and drought and Blackwell's men. It'll be waiting for us when we return." The journey to Redemption Creek took the better part of 2 days, the pace slowed by the wagons of other evacuated families joining their convoy along the way. By the time they arrived, the small town was overflowing with displaced ranchers and homesteaders. Every available room and barn space converted to temporary housing. The Eckharts were fortunate. Sheriff Miller, now gray-haired but still serving the community, offered them the use of rooms above his office. "Least I can do," he told them with a gruff smile. "Still remember that wedding day of yours." Never seen a prettier bride nor a more besotted groom in all my days. For 2 weeks, life in Redemption Creek continued under a cloud of anxiety. Each day brought rumors Apache raiders seen near the Sutton place, cavalry engaged in skirmishes to the north, negotiations underway with tribal leaders seeking peace. Adam volunteered for the town's defense, taking shifts on watch with other ranchers while Nora helped organize care for the many children now crowded into the town. At night, in their borrowed room, Nora would read from her prayer book, finding comfort in the familiar words as Will and Catherine drifted to sleep on pallets beside the narrow bed she shared with Adam. "You think our home is still standing?" she asked one night, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam pulled her closer, his chin resting on her hair. "I don't know, but whatever we find when we return, we'll face it together." In the 3rd week of their exile, Lieutenant Davis returned to Redemption Creek with welcome news the Army had reached an agreement with several influential Apache leaders, isolating the more radical warriors and reducing the threat. Families could begin returning to their homes, though with military escorts and the understanding that they might need to evacuate again if conditions worsened. The Eckharts were among the first to depart, joining a convoy headed east from town. As they approached their property, Nora held her breath, scanning the horizon for the familiar silhouette of their house and outbuildings. Relief washed over her as the ranch came into view. The building still stood, apparently untouched. But her joy faltered as they drew closer and she realized something was wrong. The corral fences were broken in places, the barn door hung askew on its hinges, and the garden she'd tended so carefully was trampled beyond recognition. "Raiders," Adam muttered, his jaw tight as he surveyed the damage. "Took the horses and cattle from the looks of it." The lieutenant ordered his men to secure the property while the family approached the house with caution. Inside, they found evidence of hasty looting: drawers emptied onto floors, furniture overturned, Nora's china shattered on the kitchen floor. But the structure itself was intact and many of their possessions remained, seemingly deemed too bulky or worthless to steal. "Could have been worse," one of the soldiers remarked, trying for optimism. Nora barely heard him, her attention fixed on the path leading to the chapel. Without a word to the others, she hurried outside, her heart pounding as she made her way to the small structure half hidden by mesquite trees. The chapel door stood open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Nora approached slowly, afraid of what she might find. As she stepped inside, tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow, but wonder. The chapel was completely untouched. The bench and kneeler stood exactly as they had left them. The colored glass window remained intact, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden floor. Even the shelf with its empty niches where her prayer book and Adam's Bible would normally rest was undisturbed. "Nora." Adam's voice came from behind her. "Are you all right?" She turned to him, wiping tears from her cheeks. "They didn't touch it, Adam. Not a single thing." Adam stepped inside, his gaze moving slowly around the small space. Apache have their own spiritual beliefs. They must have recognized this as a sacred place. Nora opened her bag, retrieving the prayer book and Bible, With reverent hands, she returned them to their places on the shelf. "Home," she whispered. "We're truly home." The work of rebuilding began immediately. While the damage to the house was relatively minor, the loss of livestock represented a significant setback. Adam spent days riding with neighboring ranchers, recovering what scattered cattle they could find and negotiating for breeding stock to replace what couldn't be recovered. The Army maintained a presence in the area through the summer, with patrols regularly checking on the ranches as they returned to operation. By autumn, a tentative normality had returned, though with heightened vigilance that would become a permanent feature of life in the territory. On a crisp October evening, as the family gathered in the chapel for their nightly prayers, Will asked a question that had clearly been troubling him. "Papa, why didn't God protect our horses and cattle? Why did he let the raiders come at all?" Adam looked to Nora, silently deferring to her deeper faith for an answer. Nora closed her prayer book, considering how to respond to her son's genuine confusion. "God doesn't promise that nothing bad will ever happen to us," she said finally. "What he promises is that he'll be with us through whatever does happen. Look around while our family is safe. Our home still stands. The chapel that means so much to us wasn't touched. In the things that truly matter, we were protected." Will nodded slowly, processing her words. "So the important things stayed safe." "The most important things," Adam agreed, putting an arm around each of his children. "Family, faith, the future we build together." As they walked back to the house under the emerging stars, Catherine skipping ahead while Will ran to check a noise in the newly rebuilt chicken coop, Adam took Nora's hand. "9 years ago, I built that chapel because I thought it would make you happy," he said quietly. "Had no idea then what it would come to mean to all of us." "It was always more than wood and nails," Nora replied, leaning against his shoulder. "It was a promise that what matters to me would matter to you, that we would face life together with faith as our foundation." Adam stopped, turning to face his wife in the gathering twilight. The years had left their marks on both of them, silver threading through Nora's dark hair, lines at the corners of Adam's eyes from squinting into the Arizona sun. But as they stood together outside the chapel that had become the heart of their home, they looked at each other with the same love that had guided them through nearly a decade of joy and hardship. "Pray beside me," Adam said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken when he first showed her the chapel. "Through whatever comes next," Nora smiled, her heart full. "Always," she promised, "always." In the years that followed, the Eckhart ranch recovered and prospered. As the Apache threats diminished and the territory grew more settled, Adam expanded their operation, eventually becoming one of the largest cattle ranchers in the area. Nora, with her gift for growing things, developed gardens that provided not only for their family but produced enough excess to sell in Redemption Creek, which was growing from a frontier outpost into a proper town. Will and Catherine grew up in the shadow of their parents' love and faith. Will, inheriting his father's aptitude for ranching and his mother's thoughtful nature, eventually took over more of the ranch operations as Adam focused on breeding programs that improved their stock. Catherine, bright and determined, showed an unexpected talent for numbers and business, keeping the ranch's accounts from the time she was 12 and eventually implementing innovations that increased their profitability. Through triumphs and setbacks, celebrations and sorrows, the little chapel remained the family's spiritual center. When Will married Mary Jenkins, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, in 1890, the ceremony took place beside the chapel, much as Adam and Nora's had 20 years earlier. When Catherine departed for school in San Francisco in 1891, an unprecedented step for a young woman from their remote community, Her parents prayed for her safety in the chapel the night before her journey. And when Adam suffered a serious injury in 1893, thrown from a horse while checking fence lines in a distant part of the property, it was to the chapel that Nora retreated during the anxious days of his recovery, reading from her prayer book until the pages were damp with tears of fear, and eventually gratitude as he slowly healed. By the turn of the century, as the frontier era of the American West gave way to a new age of railways, telegraphs, and growing communities, Adam and Nora Eckhart had become respected elders in a region they had helped to settle and civilize. Their ranch, now primarily managed by Will and his growing family, had expanded to include several thousand acres and modern facilities that would have seemed unimaginable when they first began. In the spring of 1907, as they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary, Adam and Nora sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. At 67, Adam's once sandy hair was now completely silver, and the years of hard work had left their mark in the stiffness of his movements. Nora, at 62, retained the quiet grace that had first captured his heart, though lines of laughter and experience framed her still bright eyes. "Thinking about heading to the chapel?" Adam asked, noting how Nora's gaze kept drifting toward the familiar path. She smiled, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I was. Will you come with me? My knees aren't what they used to be for kneeling." "Neither are mine," Adam chuckled, rising slowly. "But I reckon God understands old joints." Together they walked the path they had traveled countless times over the decades, arm in arm beneath a sky ablaze with the day's final light. The chapel, maintained with loving care through the years, stood just as it had when Adam first built it, a testament to faith, love, and the enduring power of a promise kept. Inside, Nora retrieved her mother's prayer book from its place on the shelf. The leather was cracked with age now, the pages thin and delicate from decades of daily use. Beside it, Adam's father's Bible showed similar signs of the passage of time and constant handling. As they settled on the bench, bodies touching from shoulder to knee just as they had as newlyweds, Adam's arm wrapped around Nora's shoulders, and she opened the prayer book to a psalm of thanksgiving. "Read it to me," Adam requested softly, "like you did that first evening." Nora's voice, slightly tremulous with age but still clear, filled the small space with familiar words of gratitude and praise. When she finished, a comfortable silence enfolded them, broken only by the distant sounds of the ranch settling into evening cattle lowing, the windmill creaking, the voices of their grandchildren playing near the house. "I've been thinking," Adam said finally, "about that day I found you at my fence line, how close I came to not checking what was out there." Nora rested her head against his shoulder. "God had other plans. He surely did." Adam pressed a kiss to her silver-streaked hair. "You saved me, Nora. Not just from loneliness, but from myself, from the bitterness I was carrying. You and your prayer book showed me there was still good in the world worth fighting for." "And you," Nora replied, "gave me a home when I had nothing, built me this chapel when all I had was faith." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and love. "We saved each other, Adam, and then built something beautiful together." As twilight deepened outside, they remained in the chapel, two souls bound by decades of shared joys and sorrows, united in a love that had weathered every storm the frontier could send their way. Their fingers intertwined, they sat in peaceful silence, surrounded by memories of a lifetime spent praying beside each other in the small sanctuary that had become the heart of their world. In the years to come, The Eckhart Ranch would continue to thrive under the stewardship of their children and grandchildren. The chapel would stand as a testament to their legacy, not just of prosperity or survival, but of faith that endured through every hardship and love that found its deepest expression in honoring what mattered most to those they cherished. And long after Adam and Nora were gone, the story would be told throughout the valley of a young woman whose prayer book was her only comfort, and the cowboy who built her a chapel and said, "Pray beside me."